Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our 23rd and last session of Chamber Talk. Almost 3 months ago, and exactly on Sunday, June 7 at 11:30 a.m., Chamber Talk was officially born. After a couple of weeks of hard work and collaboration with our partners to design and structure the program. All that started with a clear determination and direction from the Chamber's management to create and launch such an open platform for sharing insights and advice by the brightest minds in their domains. For this to be one of the various other initiatives by the Chamber to combat the impacts of the pandemic. And all that was triggered by an honest and deep faith of our role and responsibility towards the Abu Dhabi business community and the private sector. As previously mentioned at the beginning of the program, as much as we are proud of this great initiative, Chamber Talk remains for us only one piece of a bigger puzzle that the Chamber works on putting together in order to elevate the competitiveness and the capabilities of the private sector in Abu Dhabi, and also contribute to the government efforts in developing a resilient and sustainable economy. So on this occasion, please allow me first to thank the Chamber's Chairman and Board of Directors for their guidance and direction, and our partners to the program for their commitment and contribution. And of course, to the Chamber's management, represented by His Excellency Mohammed Hilal Al-Mheri, for his continuous support and trust, and for his close involvement in this important initiative, as well as to his DDGs and Chamber's management. I have expressed our appreciation and thanks to all the individual members of the partners that we've worked with. That's PwC, Deloitte, EY, KPMG, Gartner, and Salloum in their last sessions over the last 2 weeks. And so today I'm sending as well a sincere thank you to Samir Salloum, Ziyad Salloum, and Inji Osmanoglu from Salloum and Partners for all their time and efforts with us during their 4 sessions over the last 12 weeks. And I've reserved for the last session today an equivalent big credit and thank you to the Chamber's team working behind the scene for the success of this program. Probably few would exactly recognize the amount of efforts and hard work put behind the scene right before each session, and the number of people involved from the marketing and communication to the designing, translation, IT, and so on and so forth. So a big thank you goes to Muna Al-Jabri, Hamd Al-Suwaidi, Huda Al-Husani, Muhammad Eid, Rizq Abdul Rahim, Muntasir Zarrouk, Zamzam Al-Marzouki, Maryam Al-Zaabi, Sarah Khalid, Maryam Al-Mansouri, and Abdul Hakim Abdul Haq for their hard work and support on Chamber Talk from day one and even before launching. And finally, for me, I feel kind of speechless after Chamber Talk has become part of me. This was an amazing journey and experience at the personal level. Over the past 12 weeks, I've hosted 39 speakers and bright speakers, over 22 sessions, and covered the wide spectrum of topics. We've had 8 sessions in June, 8 in July, and 6 in August, and this is the last session at the 1st of September. We've covered a broad range of topics, from sector-specific topics like retail, financial services, education. We've covered technology-specific topics with KPMG and Gartner, top technology trends to consider in 2020, AI, data analytics, and big data. We've covered as well crisis management, liquidity solutions, supply chain resilience, a couple of topics as well on family businesses. So it was a wide range of topics that we've had, and it was really insightful. During those, we have attracted more than 4,500 attendees from more than 40 cities of 29 countries. The list includes majority of the GCC and Arab world, in addition to attendees from the United States, UK, Australia, Canada, Mexico, China, India, Singapore, Japan, Malaysia, Ukraine, Russia, and few others. So as we have received amazing feedbacks on the program, so We hope it has served its purpose by providing you with the insights and advice required to take informed decisions and plan for the short, medium, and long terms of your business. A brief intro about Ziad before I start. I'm not gonna do any intro about the topic today. I'm gonna leave it to Ziad. I've used my time to thank everyone in the conclusion. Ziad is a second generation family business member and a partner at Salloum and Partners, a boutique law firm which was founded 4 decades ago in 1980 by his father, Mr. Samir Salloum. Ziad is an award-winning legal advisor and arbitrator and sits on numerous boards. If you visit our previous 3 sessions with Ziad, which you can locate on the YouTube channel, Chambers YouTube channel, you'll find a more detailed introductions done earlier on Ziad. So I would urge you to revisit those sessions, not for the introductions only, but for the content and the insights provided in there. We had very successful sessions, honestly, Ziad, with you, and I'm glad that we're concluding this today with you. Your first session had around 500 something attendees, and all the audience was very well engaged. So that's quite interesting. Before I pass it to you, Ziad, and remind audience of the Q&A session, we're going to have the last 15 minutes for Q&A. I've already referred to the YouTube channel, and there is an Arabic session running in parallel, which audience can access via the chat box, the link that was shared in the chat box. I'm going to finish with a quote from His Excellency, the DG of the Chamber, Mr. Muhammad Hilal Al-Mehri, upon launching Chamber Talk. And he says, the world has changed around us, and we are here to help. So no need to tell you, guys, we've been here for the last 50 years, and we will remain for the coming 50, inshallah, hand in hand with our strategic partners from the government to continuously support you. Without any further delay, I'll pass it to you, Ziad. And apologies for the long intro today.
All right. Thank you very, very much, Sultan. Thank you very much for the introduction and the kind words. I'm really delighted and honored to have been a part of this extraordinary endeavor, and I hope this isn't going to be the last of the Chamber Talk series. And yeah, for my part, I'm very grateful to be here with you and to be on the last session of the series. And I hope you're going to find this one interesting and informative as well. So about me, you've got on the page, and with everything Sultan has mentioned. As to us as a firm, we've been around since 1980, so 10 years less than the Chamber of Commerce has been around. We should be celebrating 40 years this year, but obviously no big party, you know why. And without further ado, let's kind of get started. Since we've got quite a bit to cover, and I'm going to try and be brief while giving you as much depth as I possibly can in the circumstances. So the core of today's discussion is going to be about what businesses can do to protect themselves in the current climate, and mostly from a practical perspective that covers legal and operational risks. So the core topics that we're going to talk about are all up here on this page. Workplace health and safety. Some of these I'm going to discover, or I'm going to go into in over a series of several slides, and some of the others I'm probably just going to kind of gloss over quickly because it's it's fairly self-explanatory as long as you get the concept, and everything else is basically going to be legwork and homework, right? To actually exercise and implement. So with that, we can get started with the first bit, which is workplace health and safety. So obviously, the priority for every business at this point needs to be the continued health and safety of their staff, the families of their staff members, and obviously the customers themselves. So with that in place, by now, businesses will have put into place, or should be putting into place if they've not done so yet, and they're reopening their businesses, not working from home, to have steps taken to make sure that safety measures are put in at the workplace. So there was earlier in the year, there was Resolution 281 from the Ministry of Human Resources and Amortization. Article 2 of that resolution mandated employers to implement safety measures at the workplace. Those includes obviously enforcing compliance with the UAE's government's precautionary and preventative measures as far as they extend to the business in question, setting up screening points, screening employees before entry and at the exit of the workplace, and limiting distance between people, obviously the social distancing measures and so on. So obviously businesses need to kind of make sure that all their staff are very well informed of the steps that they need to be taking into place. You need to see whether a business at the moment, as we start to see an easing of some of the restrictions, whether even if you are reopening, whether you want to limit or restrict in-person meetings with third parties or even among staff. It's become a common practice for example, even within the firm, for us, even if we are in the office, for us to hold our meetings over, Teams or similar, some web conferencing applications. And obviously businesses are going to have to kind of help or help employees or be flexible to allow people to work from home every now and then as the need arises or as the precautionary measures go on. So that's kind of fairly straightforward as we go. The next item is going to be capital adequacy. For this, I mean, in this period of uncertainty, all is going to boil down to whether or not you're satisfied that the business can maintain adequate resources to meet the business commitments that it has, both on the short term and on the long term. So do you have plans in place in the event there's a deterioration in the financial position of the company because of the pandemic, whether it is a liquidity crunch from the part of customers or delaying payments or whichever it is, but you need to have something in place. So you need to kind of make sure that you have adequate liquidity measures in place to help you navigate all this. And you need to be functioning and thinking in terms of managing and making sure you've got operational resilience entrenched across the board, with all your employees kind of very much aware of what their role is and what they should be doing. So one thing you could do is you could encourage your finance teams to monitor not only internally the forecasts and the budgets of the entity you're in, of your business, but also to monitor the banks that you work with to see if they are changing their lending information, what measures are being made available, because these things change over time and they change relatively rapidly, whether additional relief measures are released from time to time, whether by the government and then or by the banks that you're working with, and whether they could make available some short-term financing if your capital reserves themselves are insufficient, and whether otherwise you can have a cushion ready in case you need it. In this climate, you may want to also kind of determine which parts of your business are core or non-core, and whether you need to liquidate certain assets to make sure that you are able to meet your own obligations, whether it is towards your employees or your stakeholders, your suppliers, and so on. You need to make sure that as you run the day-to-day operations of the business, that you keep your board members, if you have a board, and your shareholders regularly informed of the steps and the measures that you're taking, and that you make sure that you hold any annual general assemblies or other meetings of the board or the shareholders that you do need to hold in order to take the decisions that you need to, and to keep everybody informed as they should, and to comply with your requirements with any regulatory or legal requirements. Even if you can't hold those meetings in person, there may be alternative measures, obviously, to holding some of these, whether through video conferencing or whatnot, and still meeting the legal requirements with a written minutes of meeting circulated and signed by everybody, and so on. Obviously, each business will depend on what measures they have in place, what their articles of association and memorandum of association provides, etc. But there are measures that the business can take into account. And cash flow obviously is going to be number one. Cash flow is a lifeline of any business, and so you need to make sure that that you don't pay bills unless you have an invoice, and that you are not contributing. Ideally, you can not contribute to the cash crunch that some businesses are experiencing, simply because you are in a position of strength make sure that you process your invoices in a timely manner from your end. We're all in this together. We need to kind of help each other out and make sure that we're all, we're keeping this circle going rather than stopping things on one side and having matters, become exponentially bigger and more problematic down the line. Obviously, though, that doesn't mean that you need to spend money left, right, and center. You should be limiting your purchases to the necessities. But otherwise, businesses, I hope, and we're starting to see this now, businesses are starting to take off again. But ultimately, you need to be satisfied that your business can maintain the adequate resources it needs to meet their commitments, both on the short term and the long term. So that brings us to something that is related, which is continuity planning. This is something that you're seeing increasingly some businesses bring up. Some banks, for example, are now increasingly requiring that all their suppliers have business continuity plans in place. Many of the larger conglomerates are also requesting this from their subcontractors and so on. So you may already have one. If you've got one, that's fantastic. If you don't have one, it's not too late. And you probably have already taken quite a lot of steps down the line to, towards developing one, simply because of the reactions that the businesses have had to take, and in order to continue running while employees are working from home, or some of the other measures of lockdown and whatnot have imposed some of these things on you. If you don't have it, your item might be that you don't have that in writing. As you transfer that in what you put into practice in writing, you will find that you're coming up with a lot of extra items or things that you never thought of and that you can cover all the way at the same time. So the business continuity plan isn't just useful in the context of a pandemic. It's useful in case there's a flood, a fire, a hurricane. Obviously, you're not going to get a hurricane here, but all these types of natural disasters that can hit, whether once in a lifetime or whichever else. Some of them might have higher probability of happening, and experience, statistics show that it's very likely you might experience some downtime at some point, whether it is power outages, hardware failures, data corruption, cyber attacks, etc. So you need to identify what you absolutely need to run your business. So whether you anticipate a reduced workforce, people working remotely, or you don't have an available workforce who can work, you need to consider health and safety of employees, and obviously you need to look at whether you need to close operations for a period of time, or reduce hours, or find some alternative method of operating. So ultimately, when you identify that, what you absolutely need to run and what the key contractual obligations that you must meet are, you can start to develop a plan that can address some of these things. What you need to do is obviously ensure that the disruptions that you're facing or that you're looking at will have minimal impact on the day-to-day operations. And you need to identify what level of inefficiency or disruption is acceptable to you. You'll ultimately need to educate and train your staff. Even if all your staff are IT proficient, that doesn't mean they can all handle business continuity. People need to be educated, schooled, trained on the objectives, the requirements, the key components of your plan, and then you'll need to help them identify when do you trigger the plan and how do you put it into motion at the moment that the items are there. You'll need to isolate the sensitive information that you've got out there. So some data is so very important that losing it is going to put your entire business in jeopardy. For example, passwords. If you don't have your login passwords to your email, you can't really work. So it can be as simple and sometimes as forgive the word, as silly as stuff like your login credentials. But also it can stretch to financial records, contracts, mission critical information that you're going to need to be able to retract, to recover quickly, conveniently, if you want that. You need to prioritize that data, whatever is most vital to continuity of your business. You need to back up your data. And whatever is the most important, make sure it's well backed up, including hard copies. Sometimes you may have Not everything is on, as much as we'd like to go paper-free, not everyone is able or willing to go paper-free, so you need to protect the hard copy data. You're going to have an assortment of original contracts, employee files, whatever else that's just as important to the operation of your business. So you need to make sure that you have security controls in place to minimize the loss of that critical data, those critical documents. You may want to make sure that not all your data is stored on site, that you have a backup that's off-site. There are many different ways, depending on what you're working on, to kind of set some of this stuff. So yes, a lot of it can be IT, will and may revolve around IT and your IT systems, but a lot of it is also communications and the communication program that you put into place. So the ability to communicate in any crisis is going to be crucial. So aside from emergency contacts and stuff, you may want to draft sample messages early on in the process, have them saved draft, so you can expedite communications to your stakeholders if there's a crisis scenario that occurs. And it will also allow your business continuity team to coordinate and respond, and that sort of all those different things and steps that you can put into place to make sure that your business can continue functioning with minimal disruption. That will bring us to contract due diligence. The key purpose of this particular section is going to be identifying which ones of your contracts that you've got may impact your business. Whether we're talking about contracts that you feel your business may not be able to continue performing or performing to the level that's expected, or alternatively, where your counterpart may not be able to perform for whatever reason. So you need to identify which ones are interdependent. By this I mean where the obligations of your business or your counterpart is dependent on the fulfillment of obligations by another person. So it could be supply chain issues if somebody is getting spare parts or products from another country, and there isn't that possibility of them bringing in those products because of some of the restrictions on shipping or whatnot, either there or here. Then those are things that you're going to want to identify and double check. Identify who's the one who's most likely to suffer from this inability to meet the contractual requirements, and then you need to know your rights. You need to prepare for those eventualities, and you should ideally select either one or more team members to check each of the key contracts that you've got and to check the terms of those contracts. If you feel like, for example, as we go down this, we're going to go through some of the key items that we want to look at. But ultimately, what's going to happen is, especially if you're the party who feels you're unlikely to meet your contractual obligations, you need to make sure that you're able to communicate with your contract partners and that you do so early. If you can, try and let them know what your status is and the steps, proactive ones and others, that you are trying to take to be able to meet your obligations. See if you can work with them to find a middle ground solution. Like we said, everybody's in this together. We're all, every business. There's not a single business, I think, on earth that has not found some impact, positive or negative, but they've been impacted by this. So everybody's going to be understanding, especially if they're working with you in good faith, to try and find a solution, a middle ground solution or otherwise. You may want to, of course, sometimes there are some things that are out of your control, where even if the counterparty wishes to help, they're not in a position to. Now you want to look at your use of reserves, short-term lending options, alternative supply options, and so on and so forth. But you need to be able to identify any of this, you need to know what your rights and obligations are. So that will bring us to the key items that you need to focus. You need to focus on provisions dealing with event of default, time, extensions of time, delay, etc. So the key questions are up here. We're going to run through some of them. That obviously is non-exhaustive, and in each case, it's going to very much depend on your specific circumstances and your specific conditions. And obviously, some of these clauses or questions may not apply to you. There may be others that may be more relevant to your situation, and that's why you're going to need to study each one on its own terms and its own merits. So even if you find that ultimately none of the clauses that you've got in there allow for renegotiation of terms if you need to renegotiate the terms, that doesn't stop parties from being able to reach out to each other, obviously, to speak. And parties are not going to forget that life is very much a wheel. And if you refuse a reasonable request, especially now in these circumstances, that may leave a very bad impression with your counterpart down the line. And you could either lose business ultimately in the long run or reputation. So one example I gave in an earlier, in another presentation was the example of the supermarket on an island that got hit by a natural disaster. One supermarket hiked the prices for water, and the other did not, even though they were basically selling it at less than cost. And you can imagine where clients went after the natural disaster was overcome, and people were able to get access to water and other goods again. So that sort of thinking kind of goes down the line on every aspect. We should be trying to be reasonable as much as we possibly can in these circumstances. So we've talked about force majeure in a previous presentation as well, so I'm not going to go into it in very much detail. But what you do need to be aware of is, if notwithstanding the pandemic, if both parties are continue to be able to fulfill their contractual obligations, even if the contract is less profitable or not profitable anymore for one of the parties, force majeure is not likely to apply. Under UAE law, force majeure leads to, it requires impossibility of performance. It's not just that it's become much more difficult. And also bear in mind that under UAE law, force majeure leads to cancellation of the contract and not a readjustment of the prices. If you need to, unless your contract has a force majeure provision with specific terms that allow you to renegotiate prices or readjust prices in certain circumstances. So it's very much going to depend on what the text of your contract says. And you need to bear in mind that the burden of proof is very high. If you want to be the party that's relying on an event of force majeure, you must prove that the non-performance was due to the force majeure event that you're relying on. And you need to obviously meet whatever requirements are set out in your specific clause, like notification requirements and so on and so forth. Alternatively, some contracts may have a material adverse change clause. Now, this type of thing is essentially, it's a contractual provision that allows one party to refuse to proceed with a transaction if some events that are deemed to constitute a material adverse change or that have a material adverse effect occur after the time of signature of the contract. So these MAC clauses, as we could call them, they're usually found in facility agreements with banks, where lenders have specific rights in certain circumstances if the business of a party deteriorates and so on and so forth. They could be standalone events of default, allowing lenders to accelerate loans, but it could also be, you could also find them in the context of a sale of a company. For instance, if an acquisition is going to take place, but then there's a material adverse change and a business has lost a lot of, they lost their profitability, then that might allow the acquirer to walk away and not complete the deal. You can also find them in some construction contracts or in joint venture agreements and the like. So most of these clauses would require the business or their ability to perform the obligations under the contract. And so the interpretation of these clauses, these MAC clauses, is going to very much depend on the precise language used in the context of the contract as a whole. But that obviously is going to apply to virtually every other provision that we're talking about here. What you may want to look at as well are termination clauses. What do the termination provisions under your contract say? If your contracts become uneconomic or undesirable and your termination clauses allow for it, maybe a party can limit its losses by terminating the contract, even if there's a penalty or whatever else to pay to get out. You need to obviously see whether the penalty is lawful, et cetera, et cetera. You know, those rights of yours need to be analyzed and studied. So, for instance, some contracts may allow for one or both parties to terminate the contract on notice, and with cause or without cause. There may be with payment of compensation or without. There may be specific termination rights that are triggered in some of the circumstances that have arisen, putting aside obviously force majeure and all that stuff. If you don't have anything under the contract, well, do you have a right under law, under the law governing the contract, which might not be UAE law if you're dealing with parties in different jurisdictions? So automatic termination rights, they're generally limited under UAE law. Termination would need to be typically via application to the court. But obviously, but there is one established principle that can apply, which may be that if one party has failed to perform their obligations under the contract, then the other party doesn't have to perform theirs either. That's a right given to them under law. So I'm going to speed through because we've only got something like 15 minutes or so left. So bear with me here as I jump around. So I'm not going to go through some of these big questions up there. You need to make sure that you check your contract in detail. You need to double check whether there's time bars. For instance, civil claims typically are barred after 10 years. Commercial claims, there may be insurance claims, for instance, 3 years. Employment claims typically barred after 1 year with one or two exceptions. So these are things that you need to double check to see what type of claim you've got, what the nature of the relationship is, and what you can do. And bear in mind, no contract is going to be able to capture every possible eventuality. And that doesn't stop parties from trying, obviously, but law is very much an art. So once you go through everything, make sure you have a lawyer look at this. A lawyer looking at it through very different eyes than the eyes in which they were drafted, because they were drafted at a particular time based on specific instructions or back and forth negotiation. At the time when you have a problem, things are going to look very, very different. Bear that in mind as you go down. And dispute resolution readiness is going to be something essential if you feel that things are going pear-shaped. You need to begin preparing sooner rather than later, and you need the right tools to assess the situation. So one wise person once said, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'm going to spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. And that basically means that preparation is everything. Businesses need to document the reasons for failure to perform contractual obligations or any difficulty in doing this. It should include impacts caused by that may be brought on by government guidelines, restrictions that have been implemented because of the pandemic. And that documentation might be essential to you in the litigation down the line. And regarding completeness of information, you would not believe the trouble it can cause if your adversary's contact and address information is incomplete and you need to file a claim, or if it's not to the level required by the forum where the dispute is going to be run. So if you go to the courts and you want to file a claim against X person, but you don't have their email address, you don't have their residential address or their office, etc., it can take months before you can extract the information through the official channels and then notify people to get started. So that sort of stuff can be a big hurdle. And gathering information early can ensure that you've got the clearest picture possible, allowing you to evaluate potential outcomes before you move forward. So oftentimes we'd say a bad settlement is better than a good court case, because if you factor in the time till enforcement, the effort, the cost, you need to take a look at this stuff. You might want to, instead of going through the courts, basically look at, can you negotiate? But then identify the party that you're dealing with. Do they have a history of their reneging on contractual terms? Who are the decision makers? What are the dynamics there? So be careful there, because some parties, for instance, have developed a habit, let's say, of delaying payment to their subcontractors for years. And then when the subcontractor's patient runs out, they negotiate a settlement agreement. They'd agree to pay the original claim amount only, no penalties, no interest, none of that, or even a discount on the original amount. But that they would either change or put in restrictive dispute resolution clauses to make it either more costly. They put in arbitration in some odd forums and expensive or costly or difficult items that they know is difficult for the subcontractor who's working, and then they'd fail to pay after signature. So now, unless the agreement contains a clause stating that the original amount would fall due with all interest and penalties, and from that original date when it was first due, then essentially the subcontractor's claims are limited only to the amount that they agreed in the settlement agreement, with interest only from the date it was supposed to be paid according to the settlement agreement. And that obviously can be a very big pain for some of the people. So be careful, know who you're dealing with, who the counterparty you're dealing with is. So for insurance cover, I mean, I'm not going to go through this really. Everything's up there on the page. Consider some of the stuff that's there. Some of your existing insurance contracts might cover COVID-19 situations. It could be anything from credit or event cancellation, travel cancellation, port closures, anything else, even if it doesn't specifically bring up pandemic or similar circumstances. Data protection and confidentiality is also something I'm going to go over very, very quickly, but it is a very key consideration, especially in the current circumstances when you have people who are working off-site. They may be taking documents or laptops or equipment, hard disks and whatnot to and from the office. You need to make sure that you have measures in place that account for that document. Have you accounted for the risk of theft or loss of the data in transport, or data being inadvertently looked over by third parties? Consider those and what steps you need to take into account here. And that brings us to something that for me is probably going to be the more, something I'm going to devote a fair bit of time to as well, and that's cybersecurity, because that's been on the rise, seriously on the rise, especially in this part of the world. And I think the pandemic has just made it, with people moving off-site and working remotely, it's become a bit worse. We're seeing quite a lot of organizations that have been hit by ransomware attacks or being the victim of phishing emails and whatnot. And those can be extremely crippling blows to the organization that could take weeks to resolve, and they may never recover data if it's been hit by a ransomware attack. Or, for example, some phishing emails, phishing is essentially the practice of sending emails that are purporting to be from a reputable company or person, but in order to induce people to click on links, and therefore through that install malware or ransomware on the system, and then reveal personal information such as passwords, credit cards, etc., or other things. Some are very simple and unsophisticated, and others are extremely targeted. And we've had that happen to clients of ours who appear to have received emails coming from our firm asking people to make payments of invoices, and they look like they're coming from us. But if you look closely, you can see it's not actually coming from our firm at all. And thankfully, we've managed to catch all of these things and work with our clients to solve these issues. But it's starting to hit very close to home. So so it's become something, especially when we see so many of our clients fall victim to some quite sophisticated attacks. So, for example, not long ago, one of our clients was defrauded to the tune of several million dirhams. Because a hacker was able to intercept an invoice that was coming in, a request for payment from a genuine counterparty, and basically replaced that with a very genuine looking fake. And the counterpart and our client failed to notice the difference, made the wire transfer, thinking he was making a transfer to the company in question, and the funds actually hit the attackers, and the funds are gone. And now it's quite difficult, obviously, to collect from somebody who's already spent the money, assuming you can catch them. In this instance, I think the parties responsible, or a fair chunk of them, have been caught. But as to whether or not the funds will be recovered, that'll be something else. So the question is, so what can we do to protect ourselves here? Because this is a very real and dangerous problem, and especially if it looks like things are coming from a reputable source. So the first thing is, make sure you've got good antivirus software and firewalls in place, and everyone is aware of cybersecurity requirements, and they've been properly trained and have the information there that they need. Crucially, you need to have anti-malware, anti-spam, antivirus solutions. That's an excellent place to start, obviously. And the need for cybersecurity awareness itself is extremely important, because like in all arms races, as you improve your defenses, the enemy is going to develop new weapons that's going to bypass those defenses. So not every antivirus is going to catch everything. No antivirus will. So no software solution is going to give you complete protection. So you need to know, we all need to know how to identify malicious emails. And so those cybersecurity awareness, prevention, security best practices need to form part of the culture of virtually every business out there. So we'll run through some of the quick steps that can help you identify malicious emails and avoid opening or getting infected with email-borne viruses or malware, or otherwise falling victim to a phishing attack. So in brief, using preview mode, it's going to allow you to scan and even read your emails without completely opening them. It's not risk-free, but it limits the risks of viruses and malware being downloaded and installed on your system. So another item is looking at the sender's email. So the email addresses can be very easily spoofed or masked to look like someone you know. But if you view it differently, if you right-click, you could see where it's coming from. For example, it could be example.com.ru, but it looks like it's coming from somebody you know very, very well. Look at the email addresses of third parties who appear to be copied on the email. It might be sometimes easier to spot those that way rather than coming from the sender. Look at the subject line. If there's a sense of urgency, if there's one word in it, but it appears to be a response like document, that's a good sign that it's a malicious email. Look at the body of the message. If the sender is somebody you recognize and you know, does the text follow their normal emailing criteria? Does it have a proper salutation? Is it directly addressed to you, or is it very generic, like hi, instead of hi, Ziad? Does it have a signature for the person who sent it, or is it just kind of sent out with regards without any signature? Does it match the name of the person that you've identified in the email address? Not always. That doesn't always work. Are the graphics and the logos and the addresses, are these things that you've seen before, you've received in emails previously? Does it deviate from the norm that you've established in prior dealings in some way? So is it asking you to transfer funds to a different bank account, or referring to sensitive matters or asking you to send to their private email, or something of those sorts? Those are all big triggers. Some of the words that have been identified as among the most frequent words used in phishing emails are payment, urgent, request, attention, important, confidential, immediate response, transfer, or important update. These are some of the more common words. Look at the content of the body itself. Is it asking you to open a file or go to a web link? Does it have syntax or typographical issues? If you notice, the end finishes off with like HTML1 and whatnot, that's a huge giveaway that things are a virus or a worm. If the subject line mentions a document, but the body of the email refers to more than one document, then there are things that may be a giveaway. Make sure you're aware of all this, because with viruses, the purpose of the body of the email is to invite you to open the attachment and click the link. And a common method to do this is by instilling fear or urgency in some form. So look at the attachments if there is one. Is it a zip file? Is it a PDF? How big is it? If it's really tiny, like 1 kilobyte, 50 to 54 kilobytes, then most likely it's a virus. So some of the most popular names for attachments used in phishing attacks are purchase order, payment, invoice, receipt, slip, bill, advice, and even sometimes the word transfer. And in terms of additional steps, so you wouldn't believe how easy it would be to just pick up the phone, call, and double check, and you solve the problem right there and there. You've caught it. We all need to strive to develop a habit of checking for suspicious emails and to make it part of our routine. It's crucial that we not let our guard down here, even if an email appears to originate from a trustworthy source or from someone where the sender is expected. So like some guy, a great thinker whose name escapes me at the moment, he said, the price of peace is eternal vigilance. Unfortunately, looks like in this age, we're going to have to need to do this. So with this, I'm going to come to an end with this. We need to, ultimately with all this, if there's one thing we need to take away, is we need to stay calm. There are going to be a lot of things outside of our control. Time spent worrying about stuff that we can't control is not really productive. But an effective plan will help your organization navigate uncertain times. It'll help reduce stress for you, your employees, your customers, your business partners. It's helpful to strategize for the short term and the long term, even if the future is uncertain. There's a lot of important takeaways we can remember. Things are going to we can take the time to focus on what's important for us and for our families. Sometimes we feel that maybe that capitalism and empathy are at odds, but honestly, humanity's greatest asset is its ability to come together as a community, is people's ability to come together as a community in terms of crisis, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. So yeah, if there's one thing you shouldn't forget is you're not alone. We're all in this together. Thank you very much for your attention. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to participate in these webinars. And with that, I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ziad. As usual, very, very insightful. I don't know where to start, honestly. There are a couple of points that you've referred to that are worth probably exploring and addressing from different angles. I'm going to start with the core versus non-core. You've referred to this point, and we've covered this in various different webinars previously, specifically one with Deloitte on fast-track M&A. And fast-track M&A specifically refers to quick actions that need to be taken. Instead of going through the normal and standard procedures in M&As, there is a fast-track by which you just prioritize and go to what need to be done. So from your experience, or from what you're noticing in the market, have you seen a lot of fast-track M&A deals happening now, or it's people are just taking their time in acquiring?
Well, from some of the family businesses that we've been working with, we're hearing a lot of echoes of businesses, even those that have been impacted, that are considering making acquisitions. I'm aware of at least 1 or 2 deals that are in the pipeline, not with family businesses, but in terms of fundraising activities for startups. It's obviously changed, but as fast track as you'd like to make it, things don't always go really fast. So yeah, there's a renewed sense of urgency, obviously, in this climate, because cash is king. And for some businesses that have suffered a decline in revenue and that need to grow quickly to be able to continue to take their business to the next level, yeah, they may find that they need to go fast. I think things are going faster. The ability of being able to put up, those virtual data rooms to be able to conduct due diligence remotely at a distance, all that stuff, that's definitely helping, obviously.
Yeah. Another point on cash flow. This is the second time that you referred to this. You've mentioned this in one of our previous sessions, and the impact that's going to have on the general business community. So we've covered as well this in various different sessions in liquidity solutions and operational and financial restructuring with PwC, Deloitte, and EY. So my question is, I know it's very critical for you to look at your cash conversion cycle and to have proper working capital management. But if you want to delay your payments because your receivables have been delayed, that would have a wider impact. What you're seeing in the market now from your clients? Is it something that I know you personally at your company have done this in the right way, but what's the trend?
Honestly, I think we've seen a bit of both. There was even before the pandemic, we saw a trend, if you like, where companies would try and delay payment as much as possible. I would imagine that this trend hasn't really kind of gotten better with this. At least towards the beginning of all this mess, there were businesses that were looking for ways to basically preserve cash down the line. So they were trying to find ways to kind of protect themselves or keep a cash cushion, and so try to delay even further if possible. But I think overall now things are perhaps starting to get back to somewhere semi-normal, and so we are starting to hear echoes that things are starting to get back into regular, let's say more regular ways. I think a lot of people are conscious, or a lot of the businesses that we've been working with are very conscious of their role in the community, and so they've made it a point where even if they're not able to make full payment of something, they are making a partial payment so that they don't kind of block cash completely. So there are different ways to go about it. Obviously, if you can make it a point to pay on time and in full, that's something remarkable, and that should be lauded, definitely.
Thank you, Zia, for this. You've mentioned you've talked about having visibility of commitments in the near, short, medium, and long term. So we know how tough that was during the pandemic. I mean, it's very uncertain, very unique time. One of, I would say, and no one would have a clear indication or visibility on the commitments. Now, knowing where we are right now, and having said so, and especially in light of discussing potential wave 2 coming probably, I don't know, like God forbid, but
I hope not.
how do you think that would be accurate? I mean, visibility of commitments for companies. I know that as well would differ by sector, but would like to take your input on it.
I think even the best models are going to be are never going to actually reflect the situation on the ground, and things change very quickly. So you're unless your model changes on the spot immediately as well, is never going to be 100% accurate. But if you have a reserve, and if you build a cash reserve of some sort, or you have the ability to get some credit somewhere to help a small short-term cash crunch, then that's obviously going to be very, very helpful. Ideally, there should be a reserve. And a lot of family businesses, particularly, let's say, they've built up reserves, and they're risk averse, so they don't like to, to have those issues. So they tend to either have a significant reserve out there, or have a ready line of credit that they can draw on if the need arises, depending on their business sense. So it's, if you don't have 100% visibility, or 60 or 50% visibility, at least have a cushion that you can rely on if you need to. I think that's going to be. I think a lot of businesses are working towards that, if they've not already done so, and they're trying to make their finance side of things be more efficient and more, both in terms of turning around invoices and turning around on collections, both.
I mean, this is applied for a given group of companies. I mean, we all know, like, there is liquidity constraints now, and there is an issue with cash. But talking about that, and I'm going to link it with the question I'm going to have. I'm probably going to have 2 more questions. Ziad, we're almost to stand. One is around the business continuity plan. You've mentioned a long list of things to prepare and implement as an action plan. We all know those would come. Yes, exactly. Those will come at a cost. So, I mean, what's the best way forward if you want to prioritize some of those?
Well, you need to prioritize the essentials, right? So it's, if you cannot afford to bring in, no one's going to be able to afford the ideal solution with all the big bells and whistles. So that's why it's critical to just see what you need to do, what you have access to, right? So some things can be quite fairly simple and straightforward. So, for example, I mean, Microsoft has a suite of products that allow you to have video conferencing with everybody within your own office, and it's not a substantial additional cost to your package, your office package. So there are very simple ways that allow you to get to where you need to sometimes, without significant additional expense, but you first need to identify what it is that you really need to do. And some businesses that we deal with have a backup system that's manual. They have a series of hard disks that they rotate around. They back them up every 2-3 days, and then they have a system where they take the backups offsite and store them somewhere else. You can use cloud services with monthly payments, and there are many different solutions and many different options that don't necessarily need to impact your wallet, and that sometimes we're seeing a growing trend of businesses popping up that can provide you with cost savings. Everything from, let's say, rearranging your lighting in the office. You'll pay a tiny extra cost to reduce your energy consumption, and then you'll see the impact. It will pay for itself within a few months. And with that extra funds, you can maybe buy a new server or whatever it is that you need to kind of, you can save somewhere and spend somewhere else if you need to. There are Yeah, every business is going to have to build something.
Here is another suggestion from one of the audience, from Adawi. He's referring to using cloud services as well on monthly payments.
Yeah.
It's OPEX versus CAPEX. That's as well a good point. We have a question from Maha on, so she just want to confirm, were you suggesting, and I know the answer up front, but I mean, I'll leave it to you to take it. Are you suggesting to go by contractual obligation and position of the law, or should businesses prioritize relationship and negotiate and renegotiate until all avenues are exhausted? I believe you made yourself clear various times.
Yeah, I mean, first you need to know where you stand legally, contractually, and then you can negotiate if you need to, or and so on. It's ultimately a contract is nothing but the confirmation of the intent of the parties to the contract itself. It's a way to split the risk. One party takes certain risks and the other party will take the other risks. And if at some point the parties feel that the deal that they've struck doesn't work, they're free to renegotiate it, but they can't just unilaterally do so.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Last question, Ziad. Last question, and just after that, a quick input from your end required. So you referred to contract due diligence, and you said that it would be good to identify who is likely to suffer. Okay, so yes. So to do this exercise, what are the major requirements? How companies will be able to properly assess who's going to suffer? So they would need probably legal advice, or is it something internal? I don't know.
I would say this is more something internal, because each business is going to know which are the biggest contracts that it has. You know, the most, I would say, focus first on those. Then take a look at those and see, are you likely to see a problem with that counterpart? So let's say if you're working with ADNOC, then they have a phenomenal reputation in the country. They're an excellent counterpart to work with. Even with the current climate and even with depressed oil prices, you're not likely to have a problem with them. That's it. But if you're working with somebody who's in a rickety financial position, who's who has experienced problems, who has and you have a large amount outstanding with them, you may want to start asking yourself, how much of a risk am I taking here? And what should I do in case things go pear-shaped? If you're an owner and someone's building a plant, factory, or whatnot for you, you would probably want to make sure that your contractor is going to be able to complete the work. So it's not so much legal as much as it is first identify it from a financial point of view, from a risk point of view, operationally. What is it that makes a difference for you? And then take a look at what are the things that can go wrong, where can it go wrong, and then trace it back to what your rights are under the contract and under the law. So the legal side will pop in at the very end, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you. Last one, and very, very quickly, Ziad, you've referred in your force majeure session, and now you've mentioned this again, the material adverse change clauses. So that could be one of the lessons learned out of the pandemic and the inability to apply the force majeure clause. So have you seen this happening in higher frequency post the pandemic in most of the contracts that you work on?
I think people now, yes, people are starting to look at the way they draft their contracts very differently in the current circumstances. Because I mean, if you have a business that has an arm in Abu Dhabi and an arm in Dubai, and their warehouses in Dubai, then they have to, or vice versa. Most of their manpower is here, whatever it is. Then they're going to think twice about how they put in their contracts to make sure that they're able to comply with them. So yeah, we're starting to see people kind of. They may not be implementing MAC clauses, so to speak, but they're definitely looking at measures that are at least going to cover or tackle some of the most likely scenarios. So I think, the way people draft contracts is going to start changing, if it's not already done so, and in many cases, at least with our clients, they have.
I believe that's it for today. Thanks very much for your time, Ziad. I want to thank as well
Thank
the
you very
audience.
much, Sultan.
Any last words from your end before I close?
I want to thank everybody, all those who've attended both this conference, this webinar, and the prior four. I'm very grateful to all of you and to the chamber, yourself, Sultan, and everybody in your team at the chamber, and to the leadership of the chamber for putting all this together. Can't thank you enough for the opportunity. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ziad, and for the whole team. I want to thank the audience, and as mentioned earlier, you can visit all of the 23 sessions on our YouTube channel. We have all those recorded, and you can see them there. It's hard to say goodbye, but the good news is that there will be season 2. So we're expecting that. We'll keep you posted. It's not yet clear when this is going to happen, but there will be season 2, and we'll keep you posted. In conclusion, we hope that we have covered all or most of your concerns. Please, if you have any queries, don't hesitate to contact us. We already have the contact details and the invitations, and hope to meet you again in new project and in better circumstances. Until then, wish you all stay safe and have a good day. Thank you, Ziad.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.